Welcome back. As we mentioned earlier, there are elections looming in Israel, February 10th to be exact. Elections which have taken on so much more significance since the Gaza war. Before, the campaigns were all about peace talks, good governance, economics, leadership. Now, the focus changing sharply to Israel's security. You've got three main contenders to Israel's next leadership: the Defence Minister Ehud Barak and his Labour Party, the Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni from the ruling Kadima Party, and also the opposition leader, that is Benjamin Netanyahu. He's from the Likud party. There he is there. Now, just weeks ago, polls showed Tzipi Livni and Benjamin Netanyahu in a tight race. But Netanyahu is known for his more hardline attitude towards the Gaza-Hamas issue. That's now turned him into pretty much the front runner. Meanwhile, you've got Tzipi Livni, who's come under fire from those unhappy with the UN Security Council resolution, which called for an immediate ceasefire, and the international pressure to withdraw from Gaza, which leaves Ehud Barak in third position. Now, before the war, his Labour Party was almost irrelevant. Now, a 50% jump in popularity, certainly back in the race now. Still with us, our guests in Tel Aviv, Uri Avnery; in Jerusalem is Gerald Steinberg; and in Nazareth, Jamal Zahalka. Gentlemen, thanks for staying with us. Gerald Steinberg in Jerusalem, if I can come to you. Let's talk about Tzipi Livni first of all. This was, I think, her war. She was probably the most public face, Israeli face of this war, even more than the Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, probably because he was outgoing. Do you think that's what she intended to be, the sort of public face of Israel's war?
I think all this analysis is completely wrong. It was Hamas that determined the timing of this war, and everybody had to
I'm
go.
asking about
we had no
Tzipi
choice.
Livni,
it was
though,
Hamas that ended the Tadiyah.
To be fair, we've changed tack now.
I'm trying to explain the reality and go beyond. Okay, let me explain the reality, because I think it's extremely important. We got to go beyond the slogans. This was not a war that helped Tzipi Livni. We could have predicted it, and it certainly, we see it in the polls. To a significant degree, she was the third partner in this. Ehud Barak was the dominant factor. Ehud Olmert's not running for re-election because of the corruption charges. This election was originally called precisely because of corruption. Olmert had to resign, and Livni inherited the head of Kadima. Kadima needed to have some sort of theme. They're a very weak party. They're basically new on the block. They reflect pragmatic Israeli centralism, not just in dealing with war and peace issues. A lot of the myths and slogans on both the right and the left have disappeared. People are much more serious about that, but also in terms of the economic crisis and corruption and the need for new leadership. But the fact that she doesn't have military experience, and she did not do well either in the Lebanon war or this war on the diplomatic front, did not help her. And in that sense, we see some movement away from Kadima, which in any case, I said, was a very weak party without a strong history or a coherent ideology. Some of that moving to Barak. Barak has gained from this. My guess is it's going to be temporary, that by the time Israelis go to the polls in 3 weeks, there's going to be a greater focus on the traditional issues. The Palestinian conflict, the violence, the hatred, the terrorism is in the background. It doesn't really affect the way Israelis vote and think in these types of issues. Netanyahu has been in the opposition for a number of years. There's a lot of rejection of the failed leadership we have now, and frankly, there's no new leadership. Israel's in a leadership crisis. In some ways, Netanyahu is supported simply because there is no better option, not because there's a great deal of enthusiasm.
I was going to say, so is that saying that the surge in support for Benjamin Netanyahu, you believe, not to do with the war?
I don't think there is a surge for support Netanyahu. It's just that people are looking for alternatives. They're not happy with Livni, and they're not all that happy either with Ehud Barak. They've gone up from less than 10 to 14 seats out of 120. That's not a very large party, and so I would not overstate the benefits that Ehud Barak has gotten from this war either.
Okay, Jamal Zahalka, I'll go back to you in Nazareth and actually just recap, if you would, on a point we were talking about in the first half, and that is your own political fortunes. The fact that the Arab-Israeli parties were disqualified from these coming elections have now been allowed back in. Do you think it would have happened under any other circumstances, and is it going to affect the parties going forward?
First of all, the Central Elections Committee decided to ban Balad, and a vast majority, almost all the Zionist parties supported that, include the Labour Party, Likud, and Kadima, the mainstream parties. They were led by the fascist party of Mr. Lieberman, and he pulled them from their noses to support this banning of Arab Party and Balad Party. The Supreme Court decided to allow us, but it doesn't change the fact that we are facing a very challenge with the Israeli political society. They reject us. They don't want us to be there in the parliament. And this is a fundamental fact that we have to face in the new years. They are speaking now of changing the laws to ban us in the next elections. And I think this is reflect what's happening in the Israeli society, the rise of racism and the withdrawal of democracy. They wanted to ban us because we are demanding full equality for our people. We are demanding real democracy in the framework of the state of all citizens. And we insist on our duty to support the rights of the Palestinian peoples, including their right for resistance against occupation. So this is the issues that we faced in this ban and disqualifying by the Israeli politicians and the Central the Elections Committee. The decision of the Supreme Court doesn't reflect the political situation in Israel, which is full of hatred and clouded with war atmosphere.
Uri Avnery in Tel Aviv. We hear there from our guest in Nazareth about a political ban on parties there. It's not the type of news which I'm sure Israel wants to go out to the rest of the world. And when we look at, as we were talking about before, the public image problems and things like that, whoever becomes the next leader in Israel, are they going to be concerned about that, about Israel's public image in the world, about trying to rectify that perhaps?
Well, Israelis generally are not too much concerned about the image abroad. We are a very self-centered people. But the fact remains that this anti-democratic effort to ban the Arab parties, not for the first time, I must say, reflects the political reality in Israel. We can be very proud of our Supreme Court who blocked this effort, but the fact remains that many Israelis believe that the Arab citizens of Israel, who are 20% of the population of Israel, do not really belong to the state, and they should not decide what the state should do. This is a basic fact of Israeli life, which my crowd and I, as Mr. Steinberg so kindly put it, my crowd and I have been fighting for decades against this attitude. We believe that we cannot be a real nation, a real state, a real democracy without accepting the Arab citizens as our equals. We are talking now 2 days after the historic speech of Barack Obama. A whole era, a new era has started. A black American whose relatives are from Kenya, from Indonesia, from China, are putting a new face on America, a new face on this century, while we are, I would say, to use the words of Mr. Obama, on the wrong side of history. We are going backwards while the world, the democratic world, is going forwards. These elections are a prolongation of the war, or would be right to put it the other way around. These elections, the war was a continuation of the election campaign. This war was not started by Hamas. It was started, the timing was fixed.
I think we need to get away from these slogans and stick to some of the more the central issues here. If we're going to talk about the Israeli political system and the role of the Arab minority, you also have to understand how the Israeli Jews, the majority, look at this. We're not in the United States. We're not in a land that basically destroyed all of its native citizens and created something called a multicultural society. We're in the Middle East. Our neighbors are Egypt. Egypt is an Islamic republic. Our neighbors are Jordan. Our neighbors are Libya, Syria. How many of those? Just a minute. Just a minute. I think that's time, Mr. Avnery. You've been using your slogans for 60 years.
What's your opinion
Let other
about
people
killing
speak.
children?
You talk about
This
free
is
speech and
the
democracy.
real question.
Why don't you? I let you speak now. I think you should also listen a minute.
What
Because
about
most of what
killing?
you said is
Let
complete
aside
nonsense.
the free speech and democracy.
we're
What
not-
about killing children?
The age.
Killing
the
children.
Age of empty
What do you say
slogans,
about
as Obama
killing
said,
children?
is over.
Do you condemn
Gentlemen,
that?
I'm
Are
going
you
to jump in
against
at this
killing
stage, 'cause
Palestinian
I think
children
we need
by your
to have a
army?
more civilized discussion.
Civilized discussion, exactly.
I'm
And
trying
unfortunately,
to
everyone's
explain
talking
the
over
Israeli reality.
the other at the moment. And
What about
we are actually,
civilized killing of children,
Mr. Jamal, if you wouldn't
Steinberg?
mind,
I'm gonna wait
please,
till he
we're
finishes
actually
screaming.
running
Tell
out
us
of
what's
time.
your
Explain this
opinion
as
about
academic.
killing Palestinian children.
We're all out of time here on Inside Story. A lively debate as always. Uri Avnery in Tel Aviv, Gerald Steinberg in Jerusalem, and Jamal Zahalka in Nazareth. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. And thank you, our viewer, for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Your comments and suggestions, feel free to send them to us. The email address, as always, is insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team, it's goodbye for now.